Continuing the topic of ancient Rome as depicted in the engravings of Piranesi, today I would like to talk about one of the most mysterious sites located along the Appian Way. This is one of the oldest and most important roads of ancient Rome. It ran from Rome to Capua and stretches for more than 500 kilometers. Along this road stands a very enigmatic structure, the tomb of the Scipios. I managed to find an authentic translation of the texts from this tomb, and you will definitely be surprised to learn that it may not have been a tomb at all. But let us take things step by step. For now, let us begin with the official version. It is believed that the tomb was built in the 3rd century BC and was used until the 4th century AD, after which it was abandoned. The first person buried here was Lucius Cornelius Scipio Barbatus in the 2nd century BC. The latest burials date back to the 1st century BC. In 1780, the tomb was allegedly discovered by chance by 2 priest brothers. From that point on, a story begins that raises far too many questions. During the so-called archaeological excavations, the tomb was plundered with astonishing speed and brutality. Sarcophagi were smashed into slabs and sold to stonemasons as raw material, while the ashes were thrown away like trash. Such behavior is, to put it mildly, very strange for members of the clergy. Only in 1782, by order of Pope Pius VI, was the sarcophagus of Lucius Cornelius Scipio Barbatus transferred to the Vatican museums, essentially surviving by sheer luck. Further investigations revealed niches with funerary urns, statues, and, attention, a 3-story building from the 3rd century AD that had ended up underground. And here, the first serious question arises. How did an entire house end up beneath the ground? In addition, so-called Christian catacombs were discovered. Why Christian? Because it is commonly believed that the first Christians excavated these underground labyrinths along the Appian Way, more than 150 kilometers of multi-level tunnels and around 750,000 burials. But let us think about it. The catacombs are gigantic labyrinths. Finding a specific grave there is impossible. This means that people were buried and forgotten, which leads to a logical question. Who actually dug all this, when, and for what purpose? But let us return to the tomb of the Scipios. While studying this story, one might ask, why was it necessary to excavate an entire 3-story house? And no, this time I will not speak about a cultural layer. The truth is far more interesting. Let us turn to the engravings of Giovanni Battista Piranesi. Beneath one of them, in the artist's own hand, is written, "View of the remains of the tomb of the Scipios from the side of Porta San Sebastiano." In the engraving, we see a large monumental structure built from gigantic, finely cut stone blocks. This is a building that is impossible to overlook. And what is striking is that there are virtually no other images of it. So as not to raise unnecessary questions, we are offered a reconstruction in the classical antique style: columns, statues, decorative elements. But I cannot shake the feeling that these niches were not intended for statues at all. Incidentally, Piranesi himself was far from being a naive romantic. He worked extensively for the papal court, created interiors for Clement XIII, was involved in the trade of antique objects, and was no stranger to commerce. But this is precisely why his engravings are so valuable. He was a documentarian, a kind of photographer of the 18th century. And this is where things start to become strange. Officially, it is claimed that Piranesi visited the tomb in 1783, but the years of his life are 1720 to 1778, which means he was creating engravings after his death. In reality, this engraving was published as early as 1756 in the second volume of Roman Antiquities. That means the tomb was known at least 150 years before its official discovery. So where exactly were the Priest brothers digging in 1780? And why is there not a single word about the majestic building depicted by Piranesi? Moreover, it turns out that the tomb had already been discovered in 1614. At that time, 2 Corneli sarcophagi were found. One was left untouched. From the other, the front slab with its inscription was broken off and sold. Through a series of complex and, to put it mildly, dubious transactions, this slab eventually ended up in the possession of the papal Barberini family. And here is the key point. They mounted it into the wall of their palace, Palazzo Barberini, directly above the staircase. And once again, a question arises. What kind of sane person would think of decorating their home not with a still life or a landscape, but with a fragment of someone else's coffin? What kind of antiquarian obsession does one need to have to do that? Or perhaps this is not about aesthetics at all, but about a reminder of some kind of triumph. A sort of triumphal arch, an opportunity to once again feel that sticky sense of power and superiority. And after all, these were not marginal figures, but deeply religious people. Pillars of the faith, individuals close to the papal throne. Perhaps they knew the true origin of this slab, but that is a topic for a separate film. Then another question arises. Why was the second sarcophagus left untouched? Where is it now? And why, after the first discovery, was the tomb buried again, only to be rediscovered once more in 1780? No one knows for sure how many finds were made during the second opening. And, agree, that fact alone is highly revealing. But it gets even more interesting. In the 5th volume of Piranesi's descriptions of the tomb, blank pages are found. Where one would normally expect the most detailed commentary, there is only the line, other fragments with inscriptions, and nothing else. And beneath one of the engravings, the caption reads, "Inscriptions found during the excavations that have no confirmed relation to the Scipios." Who brought them there? Why? And what exactly was found? Apparently, far more than we are told. Now to the main object, the sarcophagus of Scipio Barbatus. It is carved from a single solid block of tuff. But any stonecutter will tell you, carving a monolithic sarcophagus with sharp internal corners by hand is practically impossible. Let us look at what was actually written on these slabs. I will translate the inscriptions recorded during the first excavations of the 18th century. And I ask for a bit of patience. Along the way, it will become clear why the official version does not hold up to scrutiny. Before us is the sarcophagus depicted in Piranesi's engravings. On it is a scratched inscription, and here a glaring discrepancy immediately stands out. A sarcophagus of complex shape, made with a high level of technology, and yet a crude, uneven secondary inscription, as if hastily scratched. If this were an epitaph, it would have been executed in relief. That is how it was always done in Rome. Epitaphs were commissioned in advance from craftsmen. They were not scratched into stone with a nail. That is not how epitaphs are written. That is how people write when they are deprived of freedom and time. Look at inscriptions in prisons, at the walls of the Brest fortress, at any site of catastrophe. That is how those who are not sure they will survive write, leaving a message in the hope that someone will read it someday. We are told, "This is the epitaph of the great Lucius Cornelius Scipio Barbatus." Very well. But then why does it seem as if all of Rome wrote only about him? Slabs with the same sets of words: LVCI, Barbat, Scipio, censor, consul, number in the dozens. And again the question arises, if this is the tombstone of a great man, why does it look like a note of desperation? The answer is simple. This is not an epitaph. And let us state this immediately. The sarcophagus was empty. No one was buried in it. Now, the text itself. A modern translation of the first inscription reads, "A deluge of mud imprisoned all people. Everything destroys, drives the water. All that was born curled up, became low, sinking into clay. The hurricane grew terrifying. The moon howls horribly. I serve the communication console. The terrible one proclaims the end. Something heavy is coming. Taurasia is covered like with a shroud. Perhaps we can sit it out. A great widowhood has been sown." Pay attention to the word Taurasia. It means standing on supports, like a T-beam, like the letter T. This is important. People knew they were living above voids, above catacombs. During the catastrophe, they descended there in order to survive. The catacombs existed before the tragedy. They were not dug afterward. In the text, the expression consul censor appears repeatedly. But this is not a title. A closer analysis reveals a different meaning. Radiation, reception, communication. It is about a device. And the very building in which the sarcophagus was located is referred to in the inscriptions as tri-milli, that which creates distance. This is not a tomb. It is a technical structure, a transmitting station, a relay. The second inscription speaks of damage to the wave chamber. The dome became distorted, and access to the interior was opened. In Piranesi's engravings, this is clearly visible. The structure is obviously deformed. Next, a terrible destroyer is mentioned, moving toward Corsica and Aleria. Most likely, this refers to a gigantic tsunami. The person who operated the communication console died last. The third inscription reports that 4 people who took shelter inside perished. The structure was flooded and buried in clay. Tri-milli ceased to function and was entombed. The later inscriptions are different in tone. They were written by a person who came after the catastrophe. Rome was covered by layers of clay. Temples, streets, houses, everything disappeared. No arable land remained. The only crop capable of growing in such an environment was rice. That is why everyday life appears in the texts: a wife, flower, survival. Thus ended one civilization. And now, the finale. Rome was excavated twice. The first time, in the 18th century. The second, in 1928 to 1929, under Mussolini. The thickness of the clay reached up to 30 meters, with additional layers of volcanic ash. Rome survived at least 2 global catastrophes, and the key to understanding their causes is hidden in just 2 words from the first inscription. But I will tell you about that in the next part. Subscribe so you don't miss the continuation, or see it on my Telegram. The link is under the video.